That was Jack Vaughn, the coach of the Brooklyn Nets. And we are joined by Kristian Winfield, a reporter for the New York Daily News. No one better, I thought, to talk to about this. You've written a few pieces on Ben Simmons. So let's just get into it. Were you shocked by what the coach said about Ben Simmons?
Um, to a small degree, uh, not so much though, because you can kind of see through Jacques' tone, his demeanor, and the words he's been using in these weeks leading up to now that, they've reached some sort of a bubbling point here where you've got Ben Simmons who has started the first 275 games of his career, comes to Brooklyn now and is coming off the bench. And you feel for him a little bit because he had offseason back surgery and he's explaining how sometimes off-season back surgery can trickle down to other parts of the body. So that's why he's saying that he has knee issues as well. But at the same time, you've got someone who's making well over $35 million this year and is not able to play the number of minutes that this team needs him to play. And the reason behind that is because Jacques Vaughn is saying he's not impactful enough. He's not impactful enough in his minutes on the floor versus the guys who just came to Brooklyn in deals for Kevin Durant, for Kyrie Irving. You're starting Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, Mikal Bridges, and Cam Johnson, and your first couple players off the bench are still Joe Harris and Day'Ron Sharpe. Ben Simmons is struggling to find his way onto the floor because, well, how do you play him over guys who are outperforming him at every position? It's tough, and you feel for him because the best version of Ben is a guy who is a superstar in the making, right? A guy who can really turn the game on the defensive end and create for his teammates. But that's not where we are. And Ben said himself he doesn't know if he's going to get to that point this season. And you put Jacques Vaughn in a situation now where you've got to make tough decisions, like putting a guy like Ben Simmons on the bench, and that's where we're at in Brooklyn right now.
Yeah, I mean, what did he play? 13 minutes the other night?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
13 minutes.
I've been pretty harsh, I think, on Ben Simmons, meaning like not because I've written anything, but maybe comments if people went digging for them of what I've said about him in the past on Twitter. But I've been pretty critical of him just in terms of like how limited he is. So I feel the coach's frustration, but I guess where I do feel some sympathy, empathy for him is that at this point, just watching, it feels like this really isn't about like just like his physical abilities, but maybe mentally, like that he's just in his own head. I'm not sure, I'm not obviously diagnosed to speak about the man's mental health, but it just seems like, I mean, you played a certain way before. I don't think that you forgot how to play, right? Like, I don't feel like you forgot that ability. So it's just like, are you just like in your own head now? And if he is, like, how do you get him back to be the Ben Simmons that we know can be impactful?
That's a tough question. I don't think there's any denying that a small part of this, maybe even half of this, is mental, right? We're talking about a guy who's not even looking at the rim at times. But at the same time, I've had back injury. I've had a back injury before. I had a lumbar sprain, and that is not even anywhere near as close to getting a microdiscectomy, which is what Ben Simmons got in the offseason. When I had a lumbar sprain, I had to crawl out of bed, right, and then hold myself on stairs to try to get into an Uber to get to the hospital to figure out what was happening. Ben had a whole procedure, and you've seen the evidence. Michael Porter Jr. is talking about it as well. Hey, it takes a while to get that burst back. Ben isn't a guy who has ever shot jumpers to score. He's a guy who uses athleticism, and when you have a back injury, there's no telling how long that can take for him to get back. So I think there's a significant part of this that is still physical, right? But given the fact that he sat out the entire front half of last season and cited mental health issues, I can only say that some of it also has to be mental as well. But it's impossible to know because we can't get into his head. We don't know.
I think that's an incredibly fair point, and I like that you can contextualized it because I've been really focusing in on the mental aspect. Watching him, you can see him pass up layups constantly. You
Yeah.
can see him just not play aggressive. And to me, a Ben Simmons who looks at the rim, a Ben Simmons who is aggressive and gets downhill quickly, like a Ben Simmons who can just play aggressive basketball is kind of what you would hope for, especially looking at a team where they need someone to step up, right? And initially, he was in a perfect situation for him, right? He had enough scoring around him. He had everything that he needed in order to just sort of very much be a tertiary guy, not like he was in Philadelphia where you have Joel Embiid spacing for you, so you better go do something, right? Like it was a much better situation for him. And so to not see him live up there, I think that a lot of people are out on him. And I think I really do appreciate you contextualizing it with the back injury so that we all take a step back and realize this is someone dealing with something major outside of whatever mental blocks he has that makes him not want to shoot free throws or not look at the rim at all. But like, be a better screener. Do the other things that they need you to do when you're on the court. To me, it's so disheartening to see him on this team really sort of fall to the wayside and fall to the bench. But Jacques Vaughn is right. And like, Can't Play Cantor was like a really sort of nice soundbite that was harsh and hit me in the heart. But what Jacques Vaughn said was Can't Play Cantor, but gave us an essay. Like he gave us a full dissertation of why. And I think it's scalding.
You know, and I haven't written this yet, so this is kind of something new that I haven't said yet. I think that some of this has to fall on the Nets front office. When you have a guy like Ben Simmons, what worked with him in Philadelphia is that the person he was sharing the floor with in Joel Embiid was a big man who was capable of spacing the floor, right? The Nets, after all this time, have still not gotten a stretch five. So you're looking at a situation where, of course, you can't rebound with Ben on the floor because you don't want to have, how many non-shooters can you play with at one time and be successful? One, right? If you have more than one non-shooter and both of them are poor foul shooters, you're toast, right? And unless you have Kevin and Kyrie to bail them out. They don't have that. And you still don't have someone to space the floor, which would be what you need to have Ben Simmons out there. Imagine if you could start Ben Simmons and have a guy like Miles Turner, right, who you can play that pick and roll action with, but also have that pick and pop action in space the floor. The Nets don't have that, and they don't have anybody that can really play that stretch out unless you're looking at Dorian Finney-Smith, who's not really the size of a five that you need to play that role. Some of Ben Simmons' struggles falls on the front office for not putting the right pieces around him in the aftermath of this Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving trade. I know it's a lot to deal with in one sitting, but if now you're looking at Ben and you want him to take a step forward, you got to have more spacing out there on the floor. You can't have that if you have him and Nick Claxton out there together.
Are you expecting?
Do you think
Ben
the
Simmons?
emergence? Oh, sorry.
Oh no, are you expecting Ben to be on this team after this season?
That's tough. Part of me says yes, because I think that as a front office, when you trade James Harden and you consider Seth Curry is leaving at the end of the season, Andre Drummond's already gone, Royce O'Neal you got from the first round pick that you got from Philly, Ben Simmons is the highlight of that deal. And at this point, there's no market for him. You're just watching him, kind of the value for him is depreciating in real time. If you're going into the summer and saying, hey, we're going to trade Ben Simmons just to get off this contract, I don't know that that's a smart move, just because I think, honestly, it sounds kind of crazy, but it can only be up from where we are right now, right? Like, maybe not, let me knock on wood, right? There's always another layer of worse that anything can always get to. But right now, this is some of the worst basketball we've seen Ben Simmons play. And I would assume once he has more time to get through this back injury, maybe, you know, some people have said that, maybe they shut him down for the rest of the year. If he can't play, shut him down and see what he looks like when he gets his back rehab. I'm not sure if we see him in a Nets jersey, just because I'm not sure what the market is for him. If the Nets can get something impactful back immediately, sure, why not? But part of me is rooting for Ben Simmons. I want to see him get through this back injury, because we're only, 3 years removed from when he scored 42 points on the Utah Jazz or whatever team he was playing. That was a career high for him. Looked like a completely different player, right? I think we want to see him get back to that type of athlete, not forget for the Nets' sake, just for his sake, just for basketball's sake, right?
I was actually trying to go through it. Like, what teams could he go to? I think you mentioned it with Miles Turner there. Indiana would be an interesting fit for him. I was looking at Portland and some of these other teams, and I was like, what contracts do they have to match with Ben Simmons? I think that's a sort of another barrier that's there that makes a trade difficult, is like, you've got to match his contract, and that's a really, really big one. And to your point, I guess my question is Nick Claxton, has he just proven to be too good this year to even try and bring in a stretch five to play Ben Simmons? Is he too good to prioritize Ben Simmons currently for the Brooklyn Nets?
That's a great question and a fair point. And I'd say the answer might be yes. But the issue with that is you have to find a way to maximize Ben Simmons. He is your highest paid player on the team. He is the player who has exhibited the longest stretch of dominance out of anybody on this roster. You have to try to exhaust your ways to make it work. So sure, why not go try to get, well, now it's too late. You can only do buyout market stuff, but I would have liked to see the Nets go get somebody who could space the floor for him and play that role and also protect the rim. They weren't able to do that. But it's difficult. And you're right. Nick Claxton has made it almost impossible to play Ben because he's been that good. We're talking about a guy who was really considered a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, leading the NBA in blocks. And now he's kind of disappeared because you reshuffle all the pieces around him. He's got a starting five that he's never played with. You know what I'm saying? So he's trying to figure it out on the fly. That's why you're seeing some low scoring games from him. I'm sure he'll get it. He'll find his group probably after the All-Star break. But yeah, with Ben, I mean, it's just a tough situation when you consider, like you mentioned, he makes 35 million this year, 37 million next year, and 40 million the year after that. And this is a guy who in the last 4 games is averaging 4 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists. That's not the 444 Hove was talking about. So it's tough, but you know, I'm sure the Nets are trying to figure out different ways to maximize him. I hope they are. I'm not sure if we see him on the roster beyond next season, but I would like to.
What's the plan for the Nets for the rest of the season? They traded away Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and I want to get into that. But like, what's their
But not
plan?
to Toronto. What's up with that?
Yeah, sorry. I think the Nets were too busy trying to get Pascal or OG and add to the roster before it was just bad. The Nets are trying to figure out right now where their offense comes from, right? Obviously, when you trade away Kevin and Kyrie, it changes the whole philosophy of your offense. You go from 2 isolation guys that you can score through to now having to play team basketball. Who would have thought, right? And now it boils down to, okay, is Mikal Bridges a guy that you can run offense through? I mean, against the Knicks, he shot 2 for 8 from the field. You tell me. It's tough, right? He had a great stretch with the Phoenix Suns when Devin Booker was out, but now it's a completely different situation. No Chris Paul, right? I'm sure Chris Paul had a decent role to play in Bridges getting those looks. Now it's, okay, can Mikal break a defense down? Can he get his own basket? We'll find out. Cam Thomas can, right? But outside of that, he's got liabilities elsewhere. He's short, he's small for the position. He doesn't know how to create for his team. The balance between creating for his teammates and searching for his own shot is still something he's developing through, which is fine. When you got a guy who can score 40 points 3 straight games, you know, you take what you take. But he's not someone that the Nets, I don't think. You have Seth Curry coming back. Right now it's a juggling act. You have so many different players on this team. They've got 8 different guys on the roster now who have started for different teams this season. And it's on Jacques to try to figure out how they all mesh together, what rotations play best. And they're going to lean on their defense, obviously, because you've got your starting lineup now has everybody 6'6" or taller. You're going to be able to get some stops, but can those stops translate in the offense? Ben Simmons could help there, right? Because he's a guy who can push the ball in transition and create for shooters. But now you're talking about playing too many non-shooters and not having the. It's a juggling act for the Nets right now, and that's why once all this happened, I said, hey, playoffs might not even happen. I know we're talking about 3rd seed, but the way this team is playing, and you look at the schedule, and you look at just the chemistry and continuity that they don't have, I'm predicting that they kind of taper off here. We saw them multiple games above 500. I think they're going to end up back in that play-in situation. And without Kevin and Kyrie, I don't think that's where you want a team to be that doesn't have that alpha scorer. So it's tough.
Does that make you surprised at them not making? I know it sounds ridiculous that a team that traded away Kyrie and Kevin Durant didn't make enough moves, but does that make you kind of confused at their lack of moves beyond that? You mentioned Seth Curry expiring. Why wasn't there a deal there? But also look at the team that they have right now. They might not make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. Should they have done something to try and build for next year?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it boils down to what were the Nets able to get in the moment. What was the best package for Kevin Durant in the moment? What was the best package for Kyrie Irving? I don't know what the market was for Kyrie beyond the Dallas Mavericks. I know the Lakers wanted him for sure. I heard that myself. I know they were going to try to part ways with those picks, but do you want Russell Westbrook? No. What is he going to get you? Or what did they get the Lakers, right? So it was a difficult situation for them because they kind of just pushed the big red button in the middle of the season, right? You're not supposed to do that when you have guys like Kevin and Kai. And that's kind of why I was always all along, like when you're fortunate enough as a franchise to have two of the best scorers in NBA history and 2 previous NBA Finals champions, right? Those are guys you want to do everything in your power to keep. And I guess there was some type of disconnect there. We can get into that maybe another time when we have more time. But to go from that to now selling your fan base on basically the Nets kids again, right? Like you've got Mikal Bridges, you've got young players who still have to take steps in their game, and you've got really good teams that are in that 8, 9, 10 spot, right? And it's just the way it's going to go. Should they have done more to improve the roster? Sure, but what could they have gotten? I'm not sure. I don't know what was out there for them. I think they really started to become sellers. Oh, I mean, that's not off the table.
Tear it down
I'm
more.
not sure. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that's off the table because other teams are going to be interested in Bridges, right? The,
Right.
the Nets could easily trade Bridges to, for example, the Memphis Grizzlies. If you put Mikal Bridges on the Memphis Grizzlies and those Grizzlies dangle those same picks they're about to trade for, they were trying to trade for Kevin Durant. Now you've got maybe 10 first round picks to build from, right? So it
Yeah.
can go so many different ways. I think it depends on how this season plays out, who we see step forward, and if anybody on this roster is kind of worth being a cornerstone. Obviously, you would consider Nick Claxton, Mikal Bridges potential cornerstones, but we've got to see how the season shakes out because now the focus is on them. They don't have 7 and 11 to kind of take cover for them.
Well, they did trade their actual cornerstones, so those guys went west.
Yeah.
Shook up the Western Conference. So what are your thoughts on just how Kyrie might impact the Mavs, and same for Kevin with the Suns? Like, do you see the Suns first of all as now the Denver has the number one record, but with the addition of Kevin Durant to the Phoenix Suns, do you see them as like the team, or would you still put Denver above them, or do you see some other team?
To be honest, after covering Kevin for 3 years, I think any team that has him is the team. He just comes in and completely changes the way a franchise approach. And number one, he legitimizes their championship aspirations the second he walks through the door. And number two, he just gives you that weapon down the stretch where it's just like, okay, who's going to stop him from scoring? Because the answer is usually it's nobody. And he can go out and get a stop on the other end, and that's ball game. We watched him do it in the NBA Finals twice to LeBron, right? So that I think it's tough because Denver has played such really good basketball this year, and they have that chemistry. Whereas Phoenix is going to have to figure out a way to put it together. But a lot of these games, I feel, are going to come down to who can get a bucket in crunch time. And when you've got Kevin to lean on, I like your odds. Just like I like Dallas's odds now because we watched what Luka did in the playoffs last year, pretty much by himself. And now you've got Kyrie Irving there. Kyrie is another guy who you give him the ball with 5 seconds left on the clock, and he's going to make something happen. I like I like Dallas's odds, but the issue with them is how are they going to get a stop? Those games are going to go to 150 to 149, and it's also going to come down to last seconds. But in the end, I still do like Denver. I would love to see Denver and Phoenix play in a series. I think that would be an incredible basketball game or an incredible series of basketball games. If Phoenix can put together, if Phoenix can figure out how they play now, right? And I'm sure it's not that difficult to figure out, okay, we've got Kevin, Booker, Ayton, Chris Paul. Let's make it work. I think they're your favorites in the West. But Denver's playing well. Golden State is probably going to turn a corner soon. It's a lot of good basketball out West for sure.
So, I mean, we've had a number of different people on, and everyone's thoughts, at least on the West, is that it's still wide open. I don't know if it's wide open, but I think there's probably some more teams than we're thinking than just the ones at the top who could potentially post All-Star, make a little push. What about the East, though? I know we're gonna wrap, but I'm curious because last night the Celtics lost to the Bucks, but Tatum didn't play, Smart didn't play, Jalen didn't play. I mean, really, it was like their supporting cast really out there, and they needed a 40-point game from Drew, and they went to overtime to win that game. And so I don't know. I just think that the Celtics are the best team in the East, and I think it's gonna anyone who wants to make the finals, I think it's gonna run through Boston.
Yeah, for a large part of this season, at least the first half of the year, maybe the first leg of the year, I was saying, look, the Celtics only got to the NBA Finals because Chris Middleton got hurt, right? And I'm standing on that. I think if Chris Middleton didn't get hurt in the playoffs last year, Milwaukee wins that series and they potentially beat the Warriors in the finals, right? This year, though, these Celtics, they have a deeper roster. Coaching change didn't impact them being at the top of the standings. And you're also seeing Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum continue to add to their games. I think it's hard to make a case against Boston, but it's also hard to make a case against Giannis in the playoffs. I mean, I don't know how you stop him from being a one-man wrecking ball coming down the lane time and time and time again. That's a series I want to see. And I think it's clear that those two teams have separated themselves from the pack. Even considering Brooklyn, when they had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, I think there was still another level they needed to get to be part of that cream of the crop in the East.
So no love for Philly. No love for Philly. What are your thoughts on, do you think they can sort of break into that tier? And I mean, the Cavs have been pretty good as well. I mean, really good.
Maybe, sure. I think for Philly, I don't know. I'm not 100. I think they're a step above Cleveland, right? I'd put them in I'd put them 3, right, behind Boston and Milwaukee. But it's just something about them where I'm not a believer, right? They feel like a highly combustible group.
Yep.
And I just don't think that they have the same type of pedigree as a Bucks team or a Celtics team, but I'd love to be proven wrong, right? I'd love to see Joel Embiid in the NBA Finals. I just want to know what that looks like, right? And I think we all do. So,
I agree with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, we'll have you back. Appreciate you, Kristian Winfield.
Thank you for having me, guys. Anytime.
Of course. Take care.
Hey, thank you for watching Brother from Another. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. Don't forget, you can catch us 3 to 4 weekdays on PeacockTV.com and on Sirius XM Channel 85.